On today's episode, we talk about the updates with the Big Eight and also how important it is to train your AI when integrating it with your business.
Welcome to the show, where AI takes the floor. Lee and Rich on the mic.
Welcome to the AI Guys podcast, where we make artificial intelligence easy to understand for everyone. I'm your host, Lee Dixon, and as always, I'm joined by AI expat traveler, Rich Swire.
Good to be here.
How you doing, Rich?
I'm doing great, man.
Dude, Europe is doing wonders for you. You are glowing today.
I am I'm here in Florence, somewhere inside of I'm not sure what I would call it, but yeah, it does wonders for the soul. It's what a beautiful city.
Yeah, absolutely. I was there backpacking through in college and spent about 48 hours there because they shut down all the trains and they told anyone who wasn't an EU national, you got to get out. So I enjoyed the city as much as I could within that time. So I hope you get a little bit more time than that.
I think I saw your picture in the train station. It says, do not.
Yeah, don't allow this man back in. We were right there next to the cast of Jersey Shore that was also in town the exact same time.
That's weird.
So they were probably like, these Americans, like, why are they all here?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, today we're going to be covering a handful of topics, but primarily we're going to dive a little bit into the battle for supremacy with consumer-facing AI. We're also going to talk a little bit about this path to AGI and where some of the major players maybe differentiate on how we're going to get there. And we had a handful of people start asking us about, how to unlock the best business practices. So we're going to dive a little bit into why assistant training is really the key to making the best assistant possible. So if it's all right with you, I think we should jump right into some of the newest news, which is Apple, ChatGPT, iPhone collab, what everyone's been waiting for. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is, Apple was always kind of given this, negative feedback on them not making big moves in AI. And I think, they're probably one of the smarter strategies in the sense that they kind of waited for the dust to settle, see who was kind of playing their hand. And as we've talked about in the past, every single one of the big eight, it's kind of like the show Game of Thrones, right? You have these
all these different
families,
houses.
Yeah, all these houses trying to kind of garner this, I guess, supposed pot of gold that AI delivers. But everybody's taking a different approach, and Apple kind of took a back seat and kind of waited for everybody to fight it out. But I think the partnership with OpenAI is somewhat surprising because, Apple is kind of known, and they've had Siri for quite some time. And there's a lot of open source LLMs that are out there they could have easily, started working with. But I think the partnership with OpenAI kind of signals to the fact that they wanted to have how important phone sales was to them this time around. If you look at their past 4 or 5 earnings, their phone sales have plateaued because, they don't really add much. You go from the last 3 or 4 versions, there isn't that big step up that people expect. And so I think the pressure was that by the fall, they wanted to have this latest version of iPhone, which also corresponds with their new chip, which is, I'm sure they've dumped quite a few billion into that. They had to have something that was a guaranteed winner. And I think that's what really drove the partnership. And people may not know the details of the partnership, but it was no money out of pocket. Essentially, this was two families coming together, saying, hey, I've got consumers, I've got devices, and I need your AI. And the AI company's like, hey, I don't have a device. I need to make a play toward the consumer in a big way and submit my leadership, which is OpenAI. And I think it's just like this perfect marriage. But my guess is that just like Microsoft is starting to develop their own products, Apple is still going to continue to develop something. And maybe by the next version or version after, you'll start seeing an Apple-driven LLM at some point. But I think it's a brilliant move, and I think it kind of puts Google and Apple from a device consumer front, really kind of in the pole position.
Well, staying with that theme of Game of Thrones, no house gets close to another house without trying to figure out how to leverage that position and exceed that. So from the outside looking in, with OpenAI being so close to Microsoft and Apple and Microsoft always having, I mean, going back to what the Justin Long commercials back in the day with like, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that there was maybe a little bit of play here trying to not cozy up to Microsoft, but trying to essentially get back in the same racing lane that they were?
I mean, I think the way I would, if I were kind of guessing, this is completely conjecture, but if I was guessing,
Sure.
I think Microsoft has shown OpenAI that they are going to build out their own. And I think there's a firewall between OpenAI and Microsoft in the sense that Microsoft doesn't see them as their AI solution. I think they thought themselves as falling behind. And, they weren't the only ones in that race to win that deal. Google was the other horse in that race. And Google and Apple already have a very significant partnership with Google Maps. I mean, Google pays Apple billions to just have their software on their phone. So it's super interesting how they beat out Google. And my guess is that Apple saw that opportunity as a speed to market, and they probably did an A/B test of Pepsi Coke and picked the best one. And I'm guessing the voice component and the video component plays a big role in also what Apple wants to show and demonstrate. But I think what we're seeing here at the end of the day is summarizing this is that everybody is running so fast toward the same goal here. And I don't know, honestly, I don't even think that goal is AGI anymore. I think it's monetizing AI and claiming stake to land. It's kind of a land grab.
Yeah,
and
you've got to get in front of the consumer in whatever way possible. And I mean,
Yeah.
Mac is obviously and Apple are some of the biggest consumer facing product sets out there.
Mm-hmm.
So now having OpenAI getting into that is going to get massive adoption very quickly. And then, Siri will just maybe integrate directly there. And then that's kind of the end of the Siri as we know it.
Yeah. And I think what's going to, in 2 to 3 years, I'm not sure exactly what it's going to look like, but if AI becomes this layer over everything that we touch as far as a consumer goes, that's going to be that it's extremely important that the devices maintain their market share, and I think that's what drove Apple, and that's what's going to put companies like Facebook and Amazon or Tesla automatically in second place when it comes to consumer-facing AI, because they don't have that black mirror in the hand, right? They don't have that device.
Yeah.
But then of course on the business side, it's a whole different ballgame. This is purely for consumers. Yeah.
Sure. And do you think they're all fighting for that throne, that iron throne, but this one's made out of like old Nokia bricks and Motorola razors? Is that how?
Exactly.
Is that what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean,
basically at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to do the math on what are the ROI on all this is going to be. I don't know if this is a complete defensive maneuver. If this is more like, okay, we know that if we don't embrace this, we're going to lose market share and we're going to lose confidence from our consumers, and our use is going to go, like, we might lose users, thus you lose revenue. I don't see a way that you can actually capitalize on consumer-facing AI because it is kind of already been out there free for the most part. So, it's like, it's the classic free versus paid. The freemium capture is so hard to overcome. But I think when we start seeing it as part of the device, and Apple, one of the cool things Apple's been able to figure out, and I read an article about this, was Apple is really looking at like, not the crazy, like, generate this video out of words type stuff, but they're looking at core, real use cases that will benefit consumers on day one.
Yeah.
And so that's also an interesting take on it. Like, they're really trying to like go, okay, how can AI really help somebody in their day-to-day life? And let's
that
not,
personal assistant that we've kind of seen floated out there. Like, I mean, Google's Gemini being integrated into their mobile browser, I think, is another piece that's just, please give us the, that search engine traffic back that we're losing to ChatGPT. So maybe that was Apple's way of saying, like, well, people are still going to use your stuff on here and there's still the rev shares and all of that. But now we can have our own, essentially, web portal built out from OpenAI and keep them stickier within our native software, like that probably is a huge win for them too.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think what we're witnessing right now is like a bunch of heavyweights playing poker, and they all are trying to protect their current
Chip stack.
And they're making, and then everybody's kind of making big bets, and they have to put, they're already pot committed, so they have to put their chips in to be at least be on the level of, we are thinking about AI and we're deploying it embedded in our current solution. But as a consumer, I wouldn't expect anything that's going to be size. It would be outsized of what you would kind of already. The experience is not going to be like crazy 10x right now. I think most of the advantages of AI, the way it's structured and the way it works, is going to benefit businesses far more than consumers in the short run. Even though almost all the attention right now is on consumers, because obviously they're trying to protect their fiefdoms from what could potentially come down. But then we even saw, like, recently, I think it was an engineer from Google say that all this focus on consumer oriented LLM is drawing all this capital and all this attention away from really the core path, which is AGI. So you could see this kind of interesting split in the story where these companies that are so money focused, and even I think OpenAI has lost their path in the sense of they were originally started off as a research, and now they're very much. I mean, I just read their revenue, their run rate on the revenue doubled to like 4 billion or something like that. So they are very heavily focused on revenue and not so much on the AGI research path. I'm sure they still obviously are dedicated to that and investing money, but you can't diversify too much attention. Like, you can't have your cake and eat it too in many cases. Like, either you're going to focus on AGI or you're going to focus on being a consumer product company. So I think ultimately the dice have not been thrown yet for that, and I don't know if AGI is going to be delayed because all the attention and money is going into LLM, which may not be the natural stepping stone on how we get to AGI. I think it's definitely I think a critical milestone that we had to have as a marketplace, so that we as humans saw the potential of this in order for us to create a market and create the financing and the supply and demand. But I do not think, and if you read some of the scientific papers and some of the research that other companies are doing around AGI, LLM is certainly not the obvious. It's not like you're that's phase one and then phase two is after that. It's almost like, yeah, sure, language is important, but true AGI is a completely different path, probably, and it diverges away from the path that they're currently on, which is how do we.
So I kind of want to dive right into this a little bit deeper, because it is interesting that Google essentially is trying to take the hat, if you will, from OpenAI, who's been very heavy on, like, yes, we're trying to make consumer product, but our ultimate goal is AGI. And like you said, now seeing these revenue multipliers and where they're going, it almost seems like they're trying to kind of take pole position again of, well, listen, this is not where AGI is going to end up being solved, is in the LLM space. But I do think there's two real key takeaways from that. First, no one in the consumer side is going to want to heavily adopt into AGI without having their palette kind of initially provided with these early adoptions, and then the larger scale adoption by now people utilizing and feeding into these models so that AGI might have something to work off of. I understand that it's much more complicated than that, but maybe that is the reason they're trying to essentially send up the flare and say, we need to get this back on track, just so that they seem like the pole position now, versus all of us as consumers have always kind of looked at, oh yeah, Google's the one monetizing, but OpenAI is the white horse. You know what I mean? Yeah,
I mean, you're exactly right in the sense that anytime you look at innovation curves of technology, there's this massive culture lag where, consumers, when they're not ready for it, they're just not ready for it. There's nothing you can do.
Sure.
I mean, a great example is, the Newton. I don't know, if you remember that, you're probably too young, but there was the
Newton, fig. Absolutely. I
love the device. Yeah. There was a device that actually was basically the first iPad before, like 10 years before the iPad. It was a massive failure, and people laughed at it. And they're nobody's ever going to do that. And then suddenly iPad is a multi-billion-dollar business. And there's absolutely, you can basically just every single innovation you look at you go, oh wow, why didn't they invent this earlier? Well, they probably did, right? Even like
Yeah.
yeah,
There have been iterations of something similar
And
to
then
it that was
sometimes
laughed
it's
and
consumers
scoffed at.
Yeah, sometimes it's consumers not ready to necessarily adopt. Sometimes it's other technologies have to kind of develop with it. For example, like in the early days of the internet, there was a couple of companies like Real Video, Real Audio, like Mark Cuban's company, and he was trying to do video, but it just wasn't working because there was no broadband, and
Sure.
and he did audio, brought radio to the internet or whatever, but like essentially when he tried to do video, it kind of failed. And then, of course, only 4 or 5 years later, YouTube started to make a rise because adoption of broadband had started to take hold, and it was you're possible to stream video for the first time. Look at classic stories of Blockbuster laughing Netflix out of the room, saying nobody's ever going to stream movies, right? So I think we're in that same phase where I think there's a lot of trash talking happening. I think it's just kind of this weird. Like we live in this kind of oligarchical world of the tech world where like they almost have like these personal fights. It's really weird. I don't know why, but like you have Elon Musk suing Sam Altman because he's hold a grudge, talking about how OpenAI lost their, technically violated what their intentions were. He just recently dropped a lawsuit, so obviously he was just trolling them. But then he also came back and said nobody can use Apple phones in his company because it's going to integrate OpenAI and due to security issues, which is all like such crap because Apple is probably the most secure device, but like, so you have all this, and then you have, at one point, I don't know if you guys remember, but like Elon Musk was challenging Mark Zuckerberg to like do jujitsu in the Coliseum.
Yeah, it was like a boxing match.
Yeah. So like
this is not a Musk stan podcast in any way, but I do agree that there are certain houses in this Game of Thrones analogy that you set up that are essentially the major players, and then it seems like there are these subsets or these companies that are just as large in a lot of ways, but do not have any kind of weight to throw around, just trying to get their name in the hat. To say like, hey guys, remember us? Remember X and all of this? And it's like, dude, just get out of here. Like this has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
And I think it's so interesting when you kind of sit back and watch it, like if it was a show like Game of Thrones. I think that's probably what my takeaway from this is like sit back, relax, enjoy the show. There's nothing going to happen that like we're not going to have AGI overnight. And like you said, LLM is a great stepping stone for us as consumers and us as business owners to like understand what machine learning, which has been around for 20 plus years, really how it impacts our lives, right? So that's the sum of it.
Yeah, exactly. And to kind of carry on with that specific thing, I did want to kind of jump into a little bit of a tech topic today where we can talk on that importance of training AI and kind of how we approach it with Rhea. I think we've done a really good job on this podcast so far, not turning things into like just pitches every single time. But I do feel that a lot of people are now looking at AI from the business perspective, not just from, hey, this is really cool, I can use it to generate a marketing plan for me or help me craft a resume. It's really, how can I apply AI to my business and how cumbersome is that going to be for my day-to-day? And I think a lot of that comes back to how something is trained and what type of context and clarity you kind of provide from day one. So I think we should talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think I like the idea, like some of these episodes, as we kind of continue to build the show, I like to, let's take the last 5 minutes or so to just hit some kind of key topics, because what we're learning, we're experiencing developing solutions for businesses using AI. And I think part of what this show is going to ultimately focus on is us communicating to those people that have their own businesses, either whether they work for them or they own their own, and how do they become an AI first, or how do they incorporate AI? And so every time we talk to companies, the first thing that we always say is, there's this massive promise, this gold, at the end of the rainbow that you kind of see, but the reality is like there's a lot of upfront work that has to be done. And it's one of the big rules of any sort of algorithm or machine learning algorithm or artificial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, is the quality of data that goes into it is going to ultimately dictate the quality of data that you're going to get out. So what we normally see almost always is most companies are not prepared because they have not curated, or even they don't have a good base of data that they can then train on or train their AI to actually function and do the work that needs to be done. So obviously, like, let's take the low hanging fruit here, like a support agent. So let's say you want to deploy AI to handle support requests, right? Whether it be live chats, SMS, or email. And we've been in many meetings where we've asked a company like, okay, where's your training manual? Like, let's say, assume you're going to hire somebody that's going to be a new support rep. What would you do, right? And so what you learn is that
go shadow Jim, who's been doing it for 15 years, or, oh, we have it piecemeal between 5 different databases or FAQs. And it's like, man, all right, first thing is we have to shine the light on you and say, it's not that you're doing something wrong, but this needs to get cleaned up because it's only going to improve your system. And that's just day one.
Or they throw them to the wolves and they just say, if you don't know the answer to the query intercom or something like that, which is not a great, that's a lot of times when you offshore support too, it's always this weird disconnect, whether it be cultural or time zone, or there's a lot of that, right? Now everybody's experienced the outsourcing of support as well. There's this language barriers and things like that always come into play as well. But with AI, I think the key thing is it kind of puts companies on notice to say, listen, if you want to get the benefits, the 10x benefits, if you want to save 80% of your costs that you typically would deploy for support, then you're going to have to get your act together as far as consolidating all this information. Now, what's cool about what we've been able to create because of that, because we walk into any company and we assume they don't have their house in order. So, we kind of approached it 3 ways. The first thing is just give us all your support tickets, whatever format. You could dump it into like basically a spreadsheet. It doesn't matter to us, unstructured text. And we have a system within our platform, Rhea, that will parse that and create basically the core training materials. That's number one. Number 2 is we also have the ability to do that shadow thing that you mentioned, where we can launch an AI assistant that can actually either mimic itself as a customer or shadow or be shadow or trained real time by another support rep, which is pretty cool experience. So the support rep can actually communicate with the AI, and then the AI is learning as that support rep is giving answers to questions, right? And then of course the third piece, obviously, and that can continue after even they go live, right? I mean, it's ongoing training. It's not just like what you do up front, but it's ongoing. And of course, the third piece, which is ideal, but not always the case, is integration into their existing system, where we could just basically plug in and start bringing all this information out real time, where there's not a lot of heavy lifting done there. But all those scenarios basically highlight one thing, which is the better information that you have to curate and to plug in and to train the AI agent, the better the solution will be. And and it's important to also, one of the things that we wanted to basically, our approach to training also from a architecture perspective, because we built our platform to help easily train OpenAI assistants. So there's multiple tiers in how an AI assistant works, right? You have this very short-term memory type thing, you have long-term memory, and then you actually have fine-tuning that can occur actually based in the model. And it's also very important to understand where you fit all those pieces. And so many people make the mistake of either putting too much into the context window, which also creates this massive increase in cost. It also slows down the assistant, but also can kind of easily confuse the assistant when they're basically answering or asking very, very basic questions. And so we typically put this into a separate area within OpenAI called the vector store, where it can easily access the support tickets and be able to answer the questions, when and how it needs to.
Use it as clarity as needed versus.
And then for the fine tuning, for the larger amount of data that can then bake into your actual model, which actually creates linkages within the OpenAI model itself, which is very powerful. So just the whole deployment of training, honestly, is, in my opinion, is probably 80% of the effectiveness, what will dictate the effectiveness of your AI. I think so many people think it's just, let's just launch an AI and start talking to it. And the beautiful thing is OpenAI provides you a very amazing basic model that you can ask questions and you can say like, what's this, what's that, and it answers. But when
Yeah.
it comes to your information of your company that lives in your
The
support
context
ticket
that's
system,
needed
it doesn't
there.
have any clue of what that is. And it actually, if it's deployed wrong, it can actually create a very complicated situation where it's answering questions wrong and it's leaning
Yeah.
on their model and not leaning on your training. So yeah, so I think ongoing, like diving into these topics like we did today about how important it is to train and what the best approach and best practices are. Obviously, if you want to learn more about this, we publish a newsletter on our website. We obviously blog about it. Can't go into much detail on the pod, but if you want to subscribe to our newsletter or go to our website at rayabout.com, you can obviously look at the blogs that we've written out that break it down in more detail.
Yeah, and I think one thing we've learned a lot over the last few months in just the training aspect with different businesses coming to us, not ones that, we go out and, qualify and talk to. And when we start really going behind the scenes of where people are, where it's just like, oh, I really want AI to take over all of this stuff for my business. And it ends up becoming this pie in the sky that they can never attain and I'm going to be an AI advocate here for a minute for anyone that's like, worried it's taking over the world, but giving the same kind of graces and patience that is when you do hire a new employee. Like you talked about with training and everything like that, it's so important to remember that, these models and the way that they position are as essentially a clean slate, just like if you were to hire someone off the street. So you're not just going to give someone a 100-page training manual and be like, you're on the phone tomorrow. Like you're going to be giving them training and some quality checks and a few things to make sure like, hey, I feel comfortable that you're like 80% there. And now that you are, like, we need to get you in front of people to, take on the bandwidth, which is why we hired you in the first place. The thing for AI is that speeds up so much faster just by having solid training and context in place and then allowing that muscle memory to kind of build, knowing that 70, 80% knowledge might be there within 72 hours versus 2 to 3 weeks. So knowing you can get something deployed very quickly for, certain tasks, and then it only will refine that even more as time goes on, I do think is something we could dive into a little bit deeper, on future pods. But the fact that we have the Substack in our show notes in case anyone wants to go there or, ever reach out to Rich or myself to talk about some use cases, even if it's just, shooting the breeze, like we're happy to do that because that's the reason we started this podcast in the first place. It was mainly to start bringing AI to the forefront for businesses and giving, a stage that could maybe resonate with people looking to get into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I think the concluding statement here, and we said it many, many times when we talk to businesses, is that the promise of AI is real, but the pathway to get there is somewhat hasn't been, really it's undriven snow. A lot of people haven't taken the time and energy to do it. We've been doing it for years, but I mean, to understand it, what needs to happen in order for you to actually have success, and knowing what you don't know is extraordinarily important. Otherwise, you're going to deploy something that's going to fall short and it's ultimately not going to be sustainable long term. You want to deploy something, just like you said, that's like an employee that you're going to nurture, you're going to train, you're going to give human feedback to, and you need tools to do that. And that's exactly what we built, because we saw really in the beginning how easy, and you always hear the folklore stories about how you could trick OpenAI to do this and this and this, and that's always going to be the case because it's not been trained on specific use cases. And a lot of times people talk about, oh, I tried to use it for my business, but it didn't understand this or didn't know this or started asking the wrong questions or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that's just mostly about bad training, just like an employee. It'd be like saying, oh, that employee is not good at their job. Well, who trained them and what
we gave them the training manual. It's like,
right.
Okay, cool. So that's all they know.
Yeah. But I mean, I think that's the one takeaway for businesses is that, to conclude this pod is, hey, listen, if you want to get engaged with AI and see the promise of what it can do for your business, start thinking about what function that you want it to do, start curating the training materials or information around that, and then reach out to people like us to help you deploy that.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of wraps it up for today. I don't know if you need to send a text and have them ring that bell again, just to tell the city of Florence that it's all done.
I'm sure they'll
but if
know.
not, yeah, exactly. They'll see you out on your balcony afterwards with your hands up.
I'm pretty sure the Pope
Thank
is
you,
watching.
Firenze. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, And thanks again for everyone that joined us on this episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button to stay in touch. Also, please check out our Substack for more content, which will be linked to this episode to continue the discussion. As always, we appreciate you listening to us being seriously stupid, and hopefully we came across surprisingly smart as well. Take care, everyone.
See you.
Where AI takes the floor.